No one's going to fall in love with your product unless they think it's great. But even if they think it's great, that's not enough. They also have to think about the product using a lot of the same thought processes that they use when they think about a person. So the brain has to classify it as a person. One way is through anthropomorphism, which is a fancy way of saying the product itself looks like, talks like, sounds like a person. So Siri is anthropomorphic. You talk to Siri, she talks back to you. Your brain hears that and jumps to the conclusion this is a person. And people fall in love with products that are anthropomorphic pretty readily. Even with Siri, so many people tell Siri that they love her, that Apple had to develop little comebacks. So what do you say? What does Siri reply when people say, Siri, I love you? My favorite one is, I bet you say that to all the Apple products.
Welcome to the Seven Hats Podcast. My name is Yuval Selik, and I've been on the entrepreneurial roller coaster for over 20 years. I've experienced it all throughout my journey: the grind, burnout, failure, and ultimately, success. The turning point for me was realizing that building a successful company is meaningless if you neglect the other significant areas of your life. So today, I'm inviting you to join me on an adventure through those 7 areas, what I call the 7 hats. Every week, my guests and I will drop valuable insights and pearls of wisdom, helping, motivating, and inspiring you to get your 7 hats in order and deliver real impact with meaning. So let's get going. Welcome, 7 Hatters. Today, we explore the multifaceted marketing world with Dr. Aaron Ahuvia, a renowned expert in brand love, as we delve into hats 1, 3, and 4, the soul, the servant, and the entrepreneur. For Aaron, the world of marketing and brand love began during his PhD program. Aaron's initial research in the realm of dating services, while studying the psychology of love, led him to ponder the connections between our affections for people and our attachments to brands and inanimate objects. This curiosity sparked his pioneering work in brand love. As a speaker and consultant, Aaron has shared his expertise with prominent companies like Google, Samsung, Maybelline, and Procter Gamble, among others. His book, The Things We Love, distills decades of research into an accessible exploration of how our passions shape our identities and connect us to the world. In this episode, we will uncover the backstory of the man behind the concept of brand love, explore the implications of his research for entrepreneurs, and delve into the intriguing intersection of marketing, consumer behavior, and psychology. If you're looking to understand why you love your favorite brands, let's extend a warm welcome to Aaron on the 7 Hats. Aaron, welcome to the 7 Hats.
Yuval, thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. Listen, Aaron, I must admit, having someone of your academic stature on the show is truly special for me. With over 3 decades, I believe, of dedication to understanding what we entrepreneurs are incredibly passionate about, and that's branding, you certainly piqued our interest. And not just any kind of branding, I'm going to presume here. We're delving into the realm of branding that compels people to embrace a brand wholeheartedly. You've pioneered the concept of brand love. While we're eagerly awaiting the insights and golden nuggets that you'll share with our 7 Hatter community, we're also equally keen to hear about your beginnings. So, what's the backstory of the man who ventured into understanding our deep affection for inanimate objects, and particularly brands? And so before we delve into the treasures of your research, share the glimpse of your personal journey, let's start with, where were you born and how was your childhood like?
Yeah, so I was born in Boston, but my parents moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan when I was very young. My father was a professor of social work at the University of Michigan, and my mother eventually also became a social worker. So I grew up in an academic community, a fac brat, as we used to say there. All my friends were fellow children, fac brats, children of professors. And it was actually a really nice childhood for the most part. Many people have long, serious issues with their parents. My parents were actually pretty great people. I don't have a lot to complain about as far as that goes. It was a pretty sort of hippy-dippy environment, if you can imagine. Ann Arbor, Michigan in the 1970s. I went to a very hippy-dippy high school. I used to have hair down to the middle of my back. I went to a place called Community High School that was an alternative school. And one of the programs that they had was that you could take classes outside of the building, including if you could get in, you could take classes at the University of Michigan when you were still in high school, if you could get into the work. So I started taking philosophy classes there because I was very interested in philosophy.
Nice.
And did reasonably well and like that. And then when I graduated, just went right into the university and got a degree in philosophy for my undergraduate degree, and was interested in sort of American consumer culture in a lot of different ways. I always had fairly ambivalent feelings about it. So on the one hand, I've always had an entrepreneurial streak. I've always really enjoyed making money. I still, you were talking about childhood memories. I have one childhood memory of, I was one of those kids who used to take his lawnmower out and just go to the neighbors and ask if they wanted me to mow the lawn for some money. I remember being with some friends and we went out and we mowed 2 lawns and we got some money and they wanted to stop and go to the candy store with the money. And I was like, wait, we could make more money. You're like, why would you want to stop? And so this was me at, I don't know, age 9 or something. So I definitely had that streak in me. But I also, growing up in this very liberal intellectual community and studying philosophy, was very critical of American consumerism and materialism because that was very much part of the ethos in which I was raised. And so I had these two parts of me that didn't really completely sit well together and still don't always sit totally well together. But I graduated from college and I had no idea what the hell I was going to do with my degree in philosophy. I'd taken some business courses just because I was curious about them and found those pretty much something I had a knack for. I ended up working at a company called Duff and Phelps in Chicago doing financial analysis. And they hired me because I had good grades. But as soon as I got in there, they were like, God, you don't know anything about what we do here, do you? I was like, no, I'm clueless. I have no idea what you do. I don't know what any of this stuff is. And they said, you have to go get an education. So you have to go into an MBA program. So I started at the MBA program at Kellogg, Northwestern. And it turns out I hated my job. I got the job because I was interested philosophically in what was called workplace democracy or employee-owned businesses. And so that was an interesting topic for me. And this company actually set up employee-owned businesses. I liked that sort of aspect of it. The actual job that I did every day, I hated what I was doing. It was a lot of spreadsheets when spreadsheets were brand new. I didn't know I was got to do this. So I was in the MBA program. I went to one of my professors, Professor Burnett, who was teaching a marketing course. And I said, you got to help me. I hate my day job. I can't take it anymore. I don't know what to do. And he said, well, you could go into advertising. You'd be great at advertising. I could get you a job in advertising in a minute. But I felt I want to be honest with people. And I don't know, if you get a job in advertising, you got to say great things about any piece of crap product that they're willing to hire you to do the advertising for. And I don't really want to be in a position where I've got to say really great things about something I think is a piece of crap. So I don't know if I really want to do that. And he said, you know what? You should just be a professor. You sound like a professor. Come into leave the MBA program, come into the PhD program and become a marketing professor. And that way you can write about all your ethical qualms about everything. So I went into the PhD program and while I was there, there's a famous marketing professor, Philip Kotler, who a lot of people are familiar with because he's famous for a lot of reasons. He's called the father of modern marketing. And he also wrote a bunch of really popular textbooks that many people have had in class. Anyway, he was telling me marketing is everything. If you're in politics, you're just marketing yourself to voters. If you're in religion, you're just marketing your religion to parishioners. Even if you're dating, like you're marketing yourself to the person that you're dating on this date. I was single at the time, and dating was way more interesting than actual marketing. So I asked him if I could do my term paper on marketing. Dating is marketing. And he's a very open-minded guy. He was enthusiastic about that. And he connected me with a professor, Mara Edelman, who had some data on a dating service. And this was in the 1980s, the mid-1980s. And so the internet was just getting going, and dating services were just getting going. This was actually started before the internet, doing this work. And dating services, some of us who are old will remember there was this thing called video dating, where people used to go and they'd have video cameras, and they'd take like a video of the person like talking about themselves. And then people who might want to date them would come in and watch videos of different people talking about themselves, and then use this as a basis for selecting their dates. So that was how this used to be done in the horse and buggy days before Match.com and whatnot. So we were studying that kind of thing. We were studying matchmakers, and we got to be the world's leading academic experts on dating services.
Wow.
And I can say that without arrogance, because the truth is we were the only academics crazy enough to study dating services. It was a very stigmatized area, and nobody else wanted to go near with a 10-foot pole. So we were the only people doing work in that area, and that, of course, made us both the most and least famous in the world. But it got me on the Oprah Winfrey Show, which is pretty cool, and talking about singles ads. So there I was. In order to do this work on dating, I had to study the psychology of love to understand why people were attracted to other people and how people formed relationships. And so I really got into that. I read a lot of that. I got very involved for years studying that stuff. I thought it was fascinating work. And then I was coming up and needed to pick a dissertation topic for my PhD, remember, in marketing. So here I am doing all this work on dating services. I'm supposed to be studying marketing. So I was like, okay, if I go on the job market as a marketing professor, and I'm like the dating services professor, I'm not going to get a good job. I got to be a little more practical than this. So what can I do? How can I hook in what I've done so far into something that seems more plausible? And I thought, people talk about loving stuff all the time. They talk about loving products and just objects. They'll say they love nature, they love swimming, they love all this stuff. What does that kind of love have to do with the kind of love we have for other people? Are they the same thing? Is it even love? Is they just using the word loosely? Do they really mean it? What's going on with that? So I did my dissertation on that kind of love, what later came to be called brand love. And it turns out that was the first sort of in-depth, real scientific study of that topic. Obviously, people had looked at why people like products before, huge literatures on that. And people had looked at romantic love and other kinds of love in a family and between friends before, but nobody had combined the two. Nobody had said, what can we learn about how people feel about products based on their love for other people and how that works psychologically? So that really took off, but it took a while. It took a while to take off. And part of it was that I was a little ambivalent about the whole thing, because I was very interested in the topic, but I wasn't honestly super sure I wanted to help people, get consumers to love more products, because I wasn't, despite my job as a marketing professor, I wasn't all in on this idea that we ought to be loving a lot of stuff. So I wanted to study it, but I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. At any event, I was a little bit of two minds about it. As I've mentioned, I've been my whole life on that. And I did get some academic papers published, and it took a while, though, for it really to catch on. And now it has. I was the first person to do research in that area. Now, if you go onto Google Scholar and you put in brand love, you will find over 14,000 academic papers talking about brand love.
Wow.
So it's become a big issue all around the world. But it took a while for that to happen. And then with a woman named Barbara Carroll, we published a paper called Brand Love that was the first paper using that term. And then I more recently did an updated version of that, also called Brand Love, with Rajiv Batra and Rick Pagozzi, which is, if you want to read stuff, it's a much better paper, the updated one, much more in-depth. And I've done a lot of work. I've published 14 major different research studies on this. And then, of course, the book that I came out with last year is called The Things We Love, How Our Passions Connect Us and Make Us Who We Are, which is, I know the people who are listening to this are mostly entrepreneurs. It definitely can help a person who's interested in brand love and interested in helping their customers love their business and their products. But the book goes into a lot more than that. It's really a larger discussion of why do people love anything, and what does it really mean, and how is it connected to our love of people?
Wow. A lot to uncover there. So a few things. So you were probably a professor without a class initially, because nobody was like eagerly running to take a class on brand love, or did you find success initially?
I had I've learned to be a good teacher. My classes are now very popular, and I've learned to be successful as a consultant. I consult with a lot of major companies on big issues. I've been working with Google quite extensively, worked with Samsung and Maybelline, and I talked to a lot of other companies as well, Procter Gamble, Ford, whatever. It's a long list. So I've gotten very applied, and my work now is very applied. And if people are listening, if you're wondering, the stuff I do now could definitely help you sell more of your products. But it took a while. But what I started off teaching was just like introduction to marketing for undergraduates. So they didn't let me teach a brand love course right off the bat. They were like, okay, someone's got to teach the introduction to marketing course. You're the junior person on the block, in you go and teach that.
Enjoy. I could have used you with my first company. I had a skincare line that I launched in 2007, and it's no longer, which means I couldn't make people love me as much as I would like to. So quick question going back, what did your parents want or think you would become growing up?
I think they were fairly open-minded and supportive. But I will say that one of the things that I study and that is very true is that we're all really shaped by our communities. Mm-hmm. And we're all really shaped by our environment growing up. And although my parents, they never said to me, do this, don't do that. They would have been open for anything, I think, pretty much. The community I was in was a very intellectual academic community. And honestly, business was frowned upon. Business was not it was not a community where you were supposed to go and make a lot of money. It was a community where you were supposed to go and become a political activist or become an artist or a writer or a professor or a doctor was fine and a lawyer was fine. But, going into corporate America was frowned upon, which is very unusual. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are scratching their heads because in mainstream America, that would sound very weird. And we live in these communities. And one of the things I research and talk about a lot is something called the false consensus effect, is that, we all live in these little tiny communities and we all think the rest of the world is like us.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not, right? And so I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who are thinking really? There are communities where going and making a lot of money in corporate America is looked down on, and that's not a good thing. But that's where I grew up.
They obviously haven't lived in California, if that was the case. So this is interesting. I was wondering, is there a brand that once evoked a deep love or connection for you? Perhaps love at first sight. And did it turn out to death do us part, or did it somehow lose its way? If so, what changed?
People ask me this question all the time. And since it was just between us, we're having our private tete-a-tete here.
I love it. Just you and I.
Just you.
No one's going to. I won't tell anyone.
Right. I won't tell anyone. I don't love a lot of brands. So there are things that I love. I would say that I love mountain biking, and my mountain bike is part of that. But I'm not sure I really love the mountain bike itself so much. I would, if I had a chance to get a better one, I would trade it in a second. It wouldn't really be a problem for me. And that's one of the hallmarks of love. When you love someone or something, even if you might be willing, if it's a thing, to trade up, you'd feel like, oh, but I'll miss the other one, right? I'll miss the old one. And we've all had this experience of having an object that we really should get rid of. I think of a teapot that a friend made for me as a gift. And I really loved that teapot and still do. And it cracked in such a way that it was not usable as a teapot. Fortunately, I thought it was decorative enough that I put it on a shelf as a decorative item. I didn't have to get rid of it. But I would say I love that teapot because it's something that it would be painful for me to get rid of this thing. Right? But there aren't really a lot of brands that I feel that way about. And I think that goes back to my upbringing, where we were really taught that was tacky to have that kind of a connection to a brand. I've learned through my work that that's an unusual view in America. The huge numbers of Americans are very happy to walk around with clothing with visible brand labels on it. In the circles that I was growing up with, people, if you got an item of clothing that you liked and it had a label on it, you would see if you could just cut the label off.
Yeah.
Because that was not something you should have there. Yeah, the long of it, I guess I would say there are some brands that I do feel something for. I'm a bit of an audiophile. I like my NAD equipment. That's been with me for a while, but not so much. I understand brand love, though, as a researcher who spent a lot of time with it, more than as something I've experienced myself that much.
So as a researcher, because I think it's interesting that you say when you say, because I think in general, do humans find love with inanimate objects or other humans, or do they find love within themselves as it relates to the inanimate object and the human that they're supposedly in love with?
Those aren't alternatives. Those are two ways of saying the same thing. Okay, so first off, people do very much love objects and activities and all sorts of things. But whenever they do that, they're thinking what they're doing is love a mechanism. So let's talk in terms of evolution. Mm-hmm. To understand love, I think the easiest way to understand love is to understand the story of how love evolved and why it evolved. So one of the things that I find very interesting is how many animals have love. I was taught that love was uniquely human. It's not remotely uniquely human. There are millions of animal species that have love. And it's a little surprising to some people because we just call it bonding when it's in animals, but it's pretty much the same thing. Their hunger, I'm sure, is different from what it feels like for us to be hungry. And when they're sleepy, it's probably different from what it feels like for us to be sleepy. We don't have any problem, though, saying that we're all both humans and animals all get hungry. Humans and animals, not all of us by any means, but certain species of animals also love. What species of animals love? It's an amazing 100% correlation. So some species, like a fish, will lay eggs and the eggs are fertilized, but the parents don't take care of the children. The eggs hatch and the children are on their own. Yeah. Other species, like mammals or some birds, they do take care of the children. They raise the children. 100% of the time. If it's a species where the parents feed and raise and take care of the children, then there will be love or bonding between the parents and the children. And if it's a species where the parents don't do that with the children, there will not be bonding between the parents and the children. Similarly, there are some species where the male and female mate both cooperate to take care of the children. And there's other species where they mate and then the male flies off or whatever, and that's it for the relationship. So if the male and female work together to raise the children, there'll be bonding or love between the parents. And if they don't work together to raise the children, there won't be any bonding or love between the parents. So it's really obvious when you think about that this is a mechanism evolved in lots of animals to be a motivation. Because think about what a parent is doing when they raise a child. So don't just think about humans. You just think about a fox Or you've got this fox out there, and that fox food is not that easy to come by, but that parent has found a bunch of food, and instead of eating it him or herself, they're taking that food back to the nest and they're feeding it to this other animal
Yeah.
that's there, right? That is not giving them anything back directly. So love is this mechanism that evolved in animals to motivate that kind of behavior. And the reason people say, oh, love is the most powerful force, it is an incredibly powerful force. And it needs to be, because the sex drive will create procreation.
Yep.
But if the species is set up so that the children need care from the parents to survive, then the species won't survive.
If it's just procreation, yeah.
If it's just procreation, you need love, the species will be extinct.
Yeah.
So love couldn't be more serious from a survival point of view of the species. So this is what love is. So how does this evolve? What happens? How do you get a fox, which is not a very reflective animal, it's not motivated by poetry or philosophy, to give the food to some other animal that happens to be its offspring? Well, in animals' brains, we have a set of behaviors that we do for ourselves, very ingrained. In even very simple animals, you feed yourself, you protect yourself, you take care of yourself. If you can get that animal's brain to put the child in the same basket, in the same category as themselves, then just as they feed themselves, they'll feed the child. Just as they protect themselves, they'll protect the child. So the fundamental mechanism in love is getting the animal's brain to see whatever that other person or thing is that they're in love with as part of their own self. And that's why one of the main mechanisms, when you take this, I know I've been going on here for a while, but you want to go back to marketing, your entrepreneurs there, how the hell am I going to sell something with all this science talk? There is a moral at the end of the story, which is, why do we love products? One of the things that is a core mechanism for loving products is we see that brand or that product as part of our own identity. Right? So people who love Apple see Apple as part of who they are. And we talk about that. I'm an Apple person, right? Mm-hmm. It's very central to them in that way. And when people see brands or products as part of their identity, then they can have this kind of love for them. And when they don't, then they have what's called instrumental value. Instrumental value can be important. So if I think something is a tool, like a great example of instrumental value is a milk carton. So long as that milk carton is in your fridge and it's got milk in it, then it's really useful because it keeps the milk from spilling all over your fridge. Yeah. So it's a good thing. But as soon as the milk is gone, that milk carton, you're getting rid of it.
Yeah.
You don't care. You don't think about it. There's no emotional loss.
Unless you collect milk cartons. And there are some that collect milk cartons.
It's just a tool. Right? It's just a tool. So you can make a lot of money building and selling tools like that. But it's going to be because your tool is useful to somebody in some way. And people will pay a lot of money for tools if they're good tools and they're important to them. So it doesn't mean that that a tool can't be valuable. It can be quite valuable, but you don't have any emotional connection to it. It's a means to an end. And as soon as a cheaper tool comes around, or a slightly better tool comes around, or a shinier tool comes around, you get rid of the old one, you replace it with the new one because it does a better job and it doesn't mean anything to you on an emotional level. If you want a relationship that's deeper than that with the customer, you want it to mean something to the customer on an emotional level, then there's a couple of different, maybe 3 ways of doing that. But the one that we're talking about now, the first one is, you got to get the customer to see that as part of their own identity, part of who they are as a person. And that's not an easy thing to do, but companies that are successful at it can be very successful.
Steve Jobs, obviously the genius of marketing, found his angle, and his angle was, we honor the creators, the creatives out there.
Right.
And that was his way of taking a box and making it a love object for many creators, especially in his commercial, honoring the geniuses out there who want to change the world by saying, if Einstein was still alive, he would use a Mac. And so that's where he was going with it. But as a consultant, somebody's hiring you for a product that is somewhat of a commodity, as an example. So potentially software, like a sales software, like Salesforce.com or HubSpot, one of these marketing or sales. There's a million of them. How can you elicit emotion with those types of products? How do you have the person who's using it related to themselves and their identity instead of just having a commodity and price is the issue?
There's two ways to think about this, right? So one way is to say, we're just going to do what's easiest and most natural for people. They're going to look at this piece of software as a commodity, as a tool. And we're not going to try to get them to look at it in any different way. And we're just going to try to work in that world. And the advantage of that is that's the most natural way for people to approach your commodity product. And so you don't have to try and force them to do something that isn't really such an easy sell, so natural for them. Oftentimes, that kind of marketing favors larger companies. Because the kinds of things you're going to want to do if you want to take that approach is distribution is really important. It's got to be what I call the useful, pleasant, easy strategy. So the product itself needs to be useful. The experience of using it needs to be at least reasonably pleasant. It should not be painful and frustrating and horrible.
All right, Salesforce is out of the picture right there.
and then everything has to be easy. The distribution, it should be distributed really broadly so that it's really easy to buy. And the advertising should be ubiquitous so that people are it's top of mind. It's like Coke. When people think about, what do I want to drink? Coke just comes to mind because they advertise so much. Yeah. It's easy to think about. That kind of an approach, which is, we're not going to target a small group of people. We're going to look at everyone who might want to get this product. And we're going to try to increase the likelihood a little bit that people who are maybe going to get this, instead of maybe a 20% chance of getting it, we're going to see if we can get that to a 25% chance that they'll buy it. And that kind of mass marketing, that can actually work well. It's harder for smaller entrepreneurs to do that. If you're a smaller entrepreneur, one of the big assets you have is yourself. So the way that people love products, there's three sort of mechanisms to this. First, the product has to be exceptionally good. Nobody's going to love a product that's mediocre. Nobody falls in love with a person and then tells their best friend, oh, I just fell in love with the most mediocre person. No, when you fall in love with a person, right, you think they're great. And when you fall in love with a product, you think it's great. So no one's going to fall in love with your product unless they think it's great. But even if they think it's great, that's not enough. They also have to think about the product using a lot of the same thought processes that they use when they think about a person. So the brain has to classify it as a person. And in order to classify it as a person, there's three ways to do that. One way is through anthropomorphism, which is a fancy way of saying the product itself looks like, talks like, sounds like a person. So Siri is anthropomorphic. You talk to Siri, she talks back to you. Your brain hears that and jumps to the conclusion that this is a person. And people fall in love with products that are anthropomorphic pretty readily. Even with Siri, so many people tell Siri that they love her, that Apple had to develop like little comebacks. So what do you say? What does Siri reply when people say that, Siri, I love you? My favorite one is, I bet you say that to all the Apple products. Yeah. So that's one way of doing it. That's not the most common. The second way that is the most common among entrepreneurs is you associate the product closely with a person. So if you think about it, a lot of the products you love, especially if they're from a smaller business, it's because there's a person there that you feel some sort of a connection to. And you don't have to really love the person. This is an example. There's a Korean restaurant that my wife and I used to go to. And we really enjoyed the fact that the manager/hostess of the restaurant recognized us and would say hello and knew our names. And we felt just this great connection to her, that she would smile when she saw us and have a little chit chat. So they changed the restaurant and we didn't like it as much and we stopped going. And I didn't feel so bad about not going, but I went back and walked in and there was the hostess again and she recognized me and was very nice to me. And in my heart, I was like, oh, I got to come back to this place. Well, why did I feel that way? I don't feel that way. It's not because I really feel that way about the bricks in the building. I feel that way because I connected to this person. And it's our relationships with people that evoke those kinds of feelings. So as an entrepreneur, to an enormous extent, any emotions people have about your business are really going to be emotions they have about you. And a lot of selling the business is building trust and creating a relationship with your clients where they genuinely believe that you are looking out for their best interest. If you can create a relationship where the client genuinely believes that you're in it for the long haul, they know you're a business, they know you want to make money, but they believe that if they ask you a question and the honest answer is going to make you less money or even no money, that you will just immediately give them the honest answer anyway, then they'll respond to that with a love for your brand and your business and an emotional connection. So a lot of it then comes down to you as a person. And so that's the second way. So the first way is anthropomorphism. You make the product itself seem like a person somehow. The much more common way is that you connect the product with a person. You get those fused together. And the third way that I started talking about a few minutes ago is you get them to see the product as part of their own identity. And that happens a lot with more consumer products.
Interesting. Let me ask you a question. So those three are awesome, but can a brand or a product, in your opinion, really elicit the full spectrum of human emotions, including those that we often hide, like fear, insecurity, and vulnerability? Or is it only the favorable emotions?
Oh, no. In fact, brands, it's a lot easier to get people to have unfavorable emotions about brands and products than just to have them get favorable.
I'm talking about intentional, not unintentional.
No, but seriously, like fear, very easy. Anger, no problem. Anyone who's ever dealt with a computer knows all about fear and anger. So especially anger of those two. But intentionally, it's harder. A lot of emotions, not all emotions are tied to people necessarily. So if there's a rock slide coming towards you, that will generate fear. Fear isn't specific about human beings, but love is specific. Love and emotional attachment is specific about human beings. Your brain is very evolved to be very careful to separate people from other things when it comes to love. It doesn't do that when it comes to fear because objects can be dangerous, just like people can be dangerous. So you can fear an object just as easily as you can fear a person. But when it comes to love, it does make that distinction. And let me give you an example of why your brain would do that. I'll give you a couple quick examples. So one is if you've got an alarm clock and it's broken and it goes off every couple hours all night long and wakes you up, right, and you can't fix it, the obvious thing to do is just to get rid of that alarm clock. But if you've got a new baby in the house and it wakes you up every couple hours, you cannot get rid of that thing. And from an evolutionary point of view, evolution's been really careful to make sure that you will tolerate just an amazing amount of pain from that baby, just respond with love instead of what you would think a normal person would respond with. So it's super important from evolution's point of view that you don't treat the baby the way you would treat an object, and to make sure that you treat it differently. Your brain really separates out all kinds of things in the way you think about a person from the way you think about an object. And there's a reverse of this, which is, if you think about your broken alarm clock the way you think about a person, well, then you can't get rid of it. And there are people that have a neurological mental malfunction, and this mechanism in your brain that normally says, this is a person, think about it this way. That's an object, think about it this other way. That mechanism is broken, and it keeps applying person thinking to objects. And these people are hoarders. So if you wonder, like, what's up with that hoarder? Why can't that person just clean out their damn living room? Why do they have newspapers stacked to the ceiling? It's because they've got this problem and their brain thinks all those newspapers, it doesn't literally think they're people, but it's applying the same kind of attachment processes to those newspapers that the brain evolved really just to apply to other people. And so that's also really bad. So you can imagine it would be really bad if you thought about people like objects, and it's also bad mostly if you think about objects like people.
Yeah.
So your brain tries to get you to not do that so much. But that's true just for things like love. It's not true for fear.
It's really interesting. Since we're on the emotional topic of connecting to brands and objects, from your community standpoint, where you grew up, where they were anti-capitalism.
Yeah.
Part of it, I think, has to do with the use of marketing tactics and emotions to change people's behavior to purchase products. And Madison Avenue has been famously great at that for many years. Brands can tap into unresolved emotions. Is that true? Maybe past traumas? And if that's the case, is that ethical for them to do that to make a sale?
I think there's a lot of things that people do in marketing that aren't ethical. I got no problem criticizing marketing. I don't think that there's a lot of people in advertising that are thinking at that detailed level that I want to like tap into somebody's past trauma. They don't really get that deep. They're trying to approach larger numbers of people than that. So I'm not sure that is really true. But what brands do, if you want to know my favorite complaint about brands, a lot of people say that the problem with marketing is that it sort of creates false needs in people. And I think that's wrong. I think it's much more common, at least today, that marketing exploits needs that, or desires, I should say, that people have, where the marketing doesn't necessarily invent that want, but it encourages people to indulge themselves in ways that are counterproductive. So junk food is a typical example where marketing doesn't invent the fact that our brain responds with dopamine when we have fat and sugar.
Yeah.
Like that's, that
fat, sugar, and salt, that's the atomic bomb right there.
Exactly. Your brain was set up that way a long time before there was advertising, but it does come in and it says, if that is what people respond to, let's just supercharge that. And we'll give them like intense, there's no food in nature in its raw state that is very high in both sugar and fat. There's really fatty foods and there's sweet foods like fruit, but there's not a single natural food that's high in both fat and sugar. But you get them together and I love my cookies, but it's going to have that, people are going to respond in this way that's so strong that it can be detrimental to themselves. Another example is gambling. Gambling has existed as far back as recorded history. People have gambled. And so it's not invented by modern capitalism, but look at what's happening now, how prolific it's becoming. And now with sports betting, how prolific it's becoming. And it's just a dopamine pump. The people who are addicted or habitually addicted to gambling, they're not benefiting. They're not better off as people because they're just spending time gambling. It's just that some business has found a way to exploit that weakness that they have and is like sucking the money right out of them. And what the person gets out of it is excitement, dopamine for a short period of time, and then often a lot of really serious problems. So that's my number one critique. Actually, I've got two. That's one is the sort of this playing into people's weaknesses, and the other is around environmental issues, where marketing and just business in general, the economic system is set up in a very faulty way. So we have built into our economic system an incentive to pollute, and people respond to that incentive. So pollution of all kinds is a cost, right? And most of the times, if you want to eat a chocolate bar, you have to bear all the costs of producing that chocolate bar. And so you're only going to eat that chocolate bar if it benefits you. You think at least it benefits you more than the costs, even though we just talked about the dopamine. That might not really be true.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of situations where you can get something and get other people to pay a lot of the costs. So when I drive my car, I pay a little bit of the cost for that, but the future generations pay a lot of cost. Like they're subsidizing me.
Yeah.
Every time I drive my car because of all the pollution's coming out of the car that they're going to have to pay for. And we ought to have a system that says you can't force other people to subsidize your consumption that way, right? If you're going to drive a car, you should pay a tax that covers the cost of repairing the damage that you're doing to the environment. That would be a much more rational system, but politically, that's difficult to achieve.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are a lot of tactics that businesses employ, such as the gambling and the fast food. It's not just the fat and the sugar and the salt. Then they put up red and yellow marketing colors to incite the brain to become hungry when you envision that logo. And then on the gambling side of things, it's the bells and whistles and the rings and dings that get your dopamine to even want to actually stay in that arena. So it's interesting. And I also agree with you. I think since day one, when you're looking at for-profit capitalistic industries, you have to be careful because it depends on what that industry is seeking to solve. If you look at the pharmaceutical industry and then you look at the food industry, then you look at any industry that colludes together in order to help each other out, right? If you look at the pharmaceutical industry, if everybody was healthy, that'd be bankrupt. If you look at the food industry, if people ate a normal caloric diet, they would not be gaining 12, 15, 20% a year in growth. So that's another aspect to business where marketing plays heavily into ensuring that they stay afloat, but yet there's a lot of, I think, problematic aspects to society because of that notion of profitability and marketing hand in hand with those types of industries.
Yeah, I would say that, first of all, you need social solutions to these sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it's not ever going to work. One of the reasons we can't make effective progress on a lot of these is that, at least in America, we're allergic to the idea of effectively cooperating with each other to achieve our goals. And we're very individualist in a sort of hyper-individualist way. So we say to the person who's got a gambling issue, just stop, just don't do that. We say to the person who's got a weight issue, just eat less, you lazy person.
Exactly.
And that's moralizing. It doesn't work. It doesn't solve the problem. And similarly, though, at the level of a business, if you're a business and you're in like the snack food industry, it's very hard to compete and to not do these sorts of practices because that's where the incentives are and where the pressure is in terms of making money. So if we want to solve the problem, we can't just wag our finger at individual companies. We need, frankly, the government to create a different set of incentives, a set of incentives where providing delicious but healthy food is actually going to make you more money. So long as it's set up so that providing unhealthy food is going to make you more money, people are going to provide you unhealthy food. So you need some way of structuring the incentives so that people have the incentives to do the right thing. I do think that companies tend to also be fairly individualistic from their own point of view. And I think it's a myth that healthcare companies, they'd go out of business if everyone was healthy. Each individual healthcare company would, if they could come up with something that would get you to be healthier, they'd make a lot of money. And they're really not looking long-term enough to worry about that being a problem for them. And they're not worried about the whole healthcare industry. Like they'd make a lot of money. They'd drive everybody else out of business. They wouldn't give a damn. That would be fine with them. So this idea that, in the auto companies, they've got this car that can get 1,000 miles to the gallon, but they just won't release it for this. Those are frankly, a little on the paranoid side. Rumors, they're really not true. If someone had a car that never broke down, they would absolutely release that, and they just drive everybody else out of business and make a lot of money. And even if it meant in 15, 20 years they'd go out of business, they wouldn't care. Nobody's thinking 20 years ahead.
You make a good point. Let me ask something. Were there any findings in your research through the years that were emotionally challenging for you to accept?
Yeah. I'll tell you one that's really interesting, which comes around so I'm looking at materialism and brand love and happiness. And you would think that I would have a bias towards saying that people who love a lot of brands ought to be happy because that would make my work look good. But the truth is, given my background, I had a bias to think people who love a lot of brands, they ought to be unhappy because they're these crass materialistic people, right? That I was taught growing up. That was a vice and not a good way to be as a person. And there is this fascinating research that some of which I've done myself, specifically on materialism. And it does show, just as I would have suspected, and that any religion worth its salt will tell you, being materialistic is not the way to be happy.
It's true.
So that is pretty well confirmed. And then there is research that I've conducted that shows that people who love a lot of brands tend to be more materialistic. So that's not surprising either. So if you put those two together, you would think that people who love a lot of brands ought to be unhappy. But the strangest thing is they're actually happier on average than other people. And figuring out exactly why that is has been something I've worked on research-wise for several years, and I'm not much closer to figuring it out than I was when I started. But it seems like even though on average, not everybody, people who are materialistic tend to be unhappy, that's only on average. There's going to be some materialistic people who are happy and some who are unhappy, right? Just like this, if the people who are not materialistic, there's going to be some of them who are happy and some who are unhappy. That's always the way it's going to work. And it seems like the people who really love brands, they're not all, yes, they're materialistic, but it picks out just those materialistic people who happen to be happy. So I'm not quite sure why people who love brands tend to be the materialistic and happy people, right? Whereas people who don't love brands can also be materialistic and tend to be very unhappy. But it's good news for my work, but it was emotionally a little difficult for me when I first started finding that, because it was so different from my cultural background, what I'd been taught to believe.
Yeah.
That it took some getting used to. It still does.
So what's next? Are you still planning on continuing your academic journey for the remainder of your existence? Or are you looking to venture into the business world and start your own company, knowing all the secrets on how to manipulate human beings into buying more products? What's that look like for you?
So there's two parts to what's next for me. One part is I do a lot of speaking. So I do keynotes at companies, talk about how to increase brand love, and also other kinds of issues around brand strategy for advertising groups. And I'm looking to do more of that. I also do public intellectual events like idea festivals, because as you could probably guess, I'm big on ideas. So I'm increasing that kind of public speaking in different ways. But I'm also really trying to follow up with the research I was mentioning at the end about why people who love brands are happy. I think it's a fascinating result. And as I said, I don't know. I know that it's there, but I don't know why it's there. And I really like to figure out the why of it all and what's going on. And that's where I'm putting a lot of my future research.
That's awesome. What an enlightening and interesting conversation. If you asked me a year ago, will I be speaking about brand love? I don't know if I would have said I would be, but it is a topic of great interest and fascination. Look where the time went. It's about an hour. So I'd like to close out my interviews with the following question. Who did you have to stop being, and who did you need to become to manifest your current success?
I had to stop being the person who was uncomfortable with American consumerism that I couldn't really look at it objectively. And I had to become someone who was more open-minded about a wider variety of perspectives.
That's awesome. Aaron, tell the Seven Hatters how they can connect with you. Where could they research and read your work? And how can they book you for a keynote, which I'd love to see one day. So it'd definitely be fascinating.
Should definitely the book, The Things We Love, How Our Passions Connect Us and Make Us Who We Are.
Amazon?
Is on Amazon. It's everywhere. So you can just look up Ahuvia. And as a friend of mine pointed out, it would be Hoovia to remember Ahuvia. So nice. Can find it that way. But I also have a website, Dr. Brand Love. So all one word, drbrandlove.com. And that's how you can find me for speaking.
That's awesome. Aaron, thank you so much for all the years of research that you put forth to help us understand this topic a little better than we did previously. Thank you for gracing us on the Seven Hats. I appreciate you being here.
Yuval, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I really appreciate being able to connect with you and your listeners.
Absolutely. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Aaron. Let's end today with a show segment that I refer to as What Can We Hang Our Hat On? And here is my takeaway. Today's topic, the intricate tapestry of brand love, is a concept that I've always found fascinating, but never really thought much about until I learned of Aaron's work. This concept of intertwining the threads of human emotions, psychology, and the world of marketing is a reminder that our relationship with brands are more than just transactions. They're extensions of our identity, our values, and sometimes our aspirations. One key aspect that stands out from today's conversation is the duality of Aaron's perspective. He was raised in an environment that critically viewed American consumerism, yet possessed an entrepreneurial spirit. Aaron's journey is a testament to our complex relationship with the material world. It challenges us to question what we love and why we love it. Is it the brand itself, the values it represents, or the part of our identity that it reflects? In the realm of brand love, we find a mirror reflecting our deepest desires and insecurities. Aaron's insights remind us that the affection towards brands is often less about the product themselves and more about the emotional and psychological needs that they fulfill. Whether it's a sense of belonging, desire for status, or a quest for meaning, our brand attachments often speak volumes about our inner selves. Also, in considering the phenomenon of brand love, one cannot overlook the remarkable example set by Steve Jobs and Apple. Jobs' visionary leadership and Apple's innovative products created a unique emotional resonance with so many. This connection goes beyond the appreciation of technology. It's a bond reflecting a commitment to creativity, excellence, and a certain lifestyle. Apple users don't just use their products, they identify with them. And this identification is a powerful testament to the emotional bonds that can be formed between consumers and brands. It's not just about the utility of an iPhone or a MacBook. It's about being part of the Apple community, a feeling of belonging to a group that shares common values and aesthetics. Under Jobs' guidance, the Apple brand mastered the art of intertwining product functionality with a sense of identity and belonging, turning their devices into an extension of the self. So as we step back into our daily lives, let's take a moment to reflect on our own brand loves. Are they shaping our identity, or are we shaping theirs? In the end, the brands that we choose to love are chapters in the story of who we are. And like any good story, they should enrich, not define our journey. I want to thank Aaron once again for joining me so that we can all benefit from his wisdom. And until next time, if you found this episode helpful, please hit that subscribe button and tell other entrepreneurs out there what value you receive from it so that we can attract even more high-quality people into our Seven Hats community. So for now, I will bid you farewell and success on your journey. And until next time, my name is Yuval Selik, and I tip my hat to you.